Welcome back to my YouTube channel, everybody. My guest today is Mr. Chris Carroll, who's a former sergeant for the Las Vegas Police Department. Today, we'll talk about the murder of Tupac Shakur because Mr. Carroll was the first police to intervene on the scene when the car driven by Suge Knight stopped. Thanks for joining me today, Chris. Would you like to tell us something about yourself or kind of introduce yourself to my viewers first?
Well, it's good to see you again. You know, we met up in Vegas a couple of weeks ago, so glad you had a fun time. I know I did. I was a police officer in Las Vegas and a sergeant and lieutenant for 25 years. And as you mentioned, I was the first officer on the scene in the Tupac Shakur murder. And you know, the questions just keep piling up, and it seems no matter how much information is out there, everybody still seems to be interested. So I'm happy to help out where I can.
So, Chris, what happened on that night was that Tupac got shot at the intersection of Koval and Flamingo. And then Suge Knight managed to drive back to the strip because probably he was taken Tupac to the hospital. And they stopped at the intersection between the strip and Hamilton. Harmon. Sorry for mispronouncing it. And you were going the opposite direction, so you kind of ran into each other. Can you describe to us what happened when you saw and you stopped at that intersection?
Sure. So what happened is the first shots rang out, and this is and I had two guys working for me on bike patrol. I was a sergeant, so I'm basically in charge of a squad of 12 officers. So they were in the area. In fact, they were in a parking garage on the 5th floor, and all of us are on bicycles. And they heard all of the gunfire, you know, all of the shots ring out, and then they could see from their vantage point a series of 5 or 6 cars speeding away from the scene. So they put that information out on the radio, which I can hear the radio. So they took off in pursuit of those vehicles, having absolutely no idea who had shot at who'd been shot, nothing. All they know is there had been a bunch of shots fired. So they started chasing the cars, and traffic down there is thick enough to where a bicycle can kind of keep up with the cars to some degree because it's just too congested for a car to take off. So while they were in pursuit, I heard them on the radio, and I was coming from the opposite direction. So that location is only about 2 blocks away from the Las Vegas Strip, which is Las Vegas Boulevard. So Suge Knight was the driver. He flipped a U-turn at that intersection, which had him pointed directly at the Strip. So he took off to the Strip. When he got to Las Vegas Boulevard, he hung a left, which is southbound, which I was heading northbound. So he's coming from one direction, I'm coming, and we're actually heading right towards each other. When we got to Harmon Boulevard, they tried to hang a left turn, but they were going too fast, and they had 2 tires blown out on Suge Knight and Tupac's car from hitting the curb. So the rims were dented and the tires were blown out on the right side of the car. So when they pulled into the intersection, they kind of spun out, and the whole entourage stopped. And at the same time, I came sliding in on my bicycle. So and I didn't know anything about what had happened. All I know is there's been a bunch of shots fired. I have no idea who fired the shots, what had happened. So when they came to the stop, everybody kind of jumped out of the cars, and I took my gun out and I pointed at everybody. I'm telling them to get down on the ground, trying to take the control of the situation. There's I don't know exactly 8 or 9 guys involved. So it was a pretty tense situation right there for the moment. You know, when I told everybody to get down, there was varying degrees of cooperation. You know, some of the guys did, some of the guys didn't, and I could sort of see them looking at each other, thinking, "Do we listen to this guy? You know, what do we do here?" Ultimately, I see that there's still one person sitting in one of the cars, And I thought for sure this was going to turn into a shootout. There was no doubt in my mind. Of course, as it turns out, it didn't. But the one person still sitting in the car was Tupac. I had no idea of knowing that at the time. So that person was the threat to me because I can see everybody else, but somebody in a car, you can't see what's going on, can't tell what they're doing. They could have a weapon. So I kind of keyed in on that person. So I approached the car. I yelled at him to get out of the car. Nothing happened. So I went to open the car door myself. When I grabbed the handle with my left hand, I still had my gun in my right hand. I could see there were bullet holes all around the door of the car. So I think the bullets had somewhat disabled the handle, the open and closing mechanism. So I had a hard time getting the door open, and I was tugging on it, and it popped open. And when it popped open, Tupac was inside and he was leaning against the door. So when I opened the door, he kind of fell out with the door being open, and I just kind of grabbed him with my left hand and set him down to the pavement. And that's how we got that far in the situation. So as I'm letting him down, Suge Knight was out there. He had been shot in the side of the head. And what had happened is the bullet had penetrated his scalp, but not his skull. So he was still running around, yelling. He had blood flying out of the side of his head. And he's looking at Tupac and he was yelling at him, "Pack, pack." And I could see that Tupac was kind of trying to yell back to him, but he was too injured to do it. And he was at this point, he had blood starting to come out of his mouth and his nose. And he was trying to yell back at Suge Knight, but he couldn't really get a breath together. Meanwhile, Suge Knight is kind of running up onto my back, which is a very threatening situation for me because, this guy is huge. We're talking about a 400-pound guy, maybe 6'6". I mean, he's gigantic. And I was thinking, if this guy jumps onto my back, it's going to be bad for me. It's going to be trouble. And plus, I've still got all the other guys at the scene are still kind of standing there. Some of them are kneeling, some of them are laying down. So I point my gun at Suge and tell him to back away from me. And he'd kind of put his hands up, and he would back away a little bit at first. And then I turn my attention back to Tupac, and Suge would come running back up my backside again. I'd point my gun at him and he'd back off again. So I was looking at Tupac, and about this time, I saw for the first time there was a cop there, one of the guys who worked for me, and he literally had his hands in Suge's chest, and he's kind of pushing him away. So I thought, thank God I'm not here alone. I've finally got some other guys to kind of deal with everybody else that's going on. So I was looking at Tupac, and I could tell he was in extremely bad shape. He had multiple torso wounds he was all bleeding in his chest and torso. I couldn't even tell where the bullet wounds were exactly. And, like I said, he was bleeding out his mouth and nose. He was having a real difficult time breathing. The blood was starting to choke him. So we have something in our law called a dying declaration, which is if somebody is in fact dying, if they could tell you who's responsible for what happened to them, that is admissible in court. So I tried to get basically a dying declaration from him, and I asked, what happened? Who shot you? What's going on? So most of the people, most murder victims know who their murderer is. So there's actually, if somebody's been shot, odds are the victim knows who did it most of the time. So I was trying to ask him, what happened and who shot you? And at first he was just kind of ignoring me. He was just trying to yell back at Suge Knight. And then I noticed all of a sudden, while he's yelling back at Suge Knight, he just instantly changed to where he made the determination that physically he couldn't do it anymore. He couldn't yell, he couldn't move, and he just kind of stopped. He stopped squirming, stopped trying to yell, and just kind of went almost into a peaceful mode. And I looked at him again, and I asked him who shot him, and he's finally paying attention to me now because he'd kind of given up yelling at Suge, and he was starting to get his breath together. And I thought he was going to actually tell me. And when he got his breath together, he looked at me and he said, "Fuck you." And after he said it, his eyes kind of rolled back in his head, and he started gurgling and went into a state of unconsciousness. And those would be the last words that he ever said in his life.
So at first you thought that Suge Knight was a threat to you.
I thought he was a threat. I mean, I didn't know. You got to remember, I'm coming to this. I don't know who anybody is. I don't know who's been shooting. I don't know anything that's been going on. And this guy is this massive guy, keeps running up on my back. It's a bad situation.
And
And
also,
he's
go ahead.
flying blood out of the side of his head the whole time, and he doesn't even care. He doesn't even care about the wound in his head.
Also, the
So,
rest of Tupac's entourage was behaving weirdly.
I'm sorry?
The rest of Tupac's entourage, were they?
There was varying degrees of cooperation. That's when I knew I had at least one other cop there. As it turns out, there were two. But this intersection, so we're literally in the middle of the Las Vegas Strip and Harmon Avenue. Now, this is a big intersection. You're talking about 4 lanes each way, a large side street, and it was kind of chaotic there at first. So they're just kind of trying to contain the entourage and get everybody down on the ground, which eventually they did. But people are yelling. There's guys in the entourage that, of course, they're looking at Tupac because everybody can see he's the one guy who's been shot. And we're just trying to contain the situation, basically.
Well, there's one thing that you didn't mention, and that's very interesting, and I would like you to elaborate. That is, one of the main eyewitnesses in this situation, according to what we hear on the news, is Frank Alexander, who was Tupac's bodyguard, who allegedly was driving Tupac Shakur's girlfriend, who was Kidada Jones, the daughter of Quincy Jones. It was driving Kidada's car and was right behind them. Do you remember seeing Frank Alexander on the scene?
No, I don't. And you know what? This is the one guy whose story makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. I'm sorry, the dogs are kind of bugging me there.
No problem.
This is the one guy whose story makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And I think I saw an interview with him, and he says that apparently had been a Los Angeles police officer who was working security for Tupac. And he says he had his badge and he flashed a badge and we let him run up to the car. That's absolutely ridiculous. All of us cops working together, we all know each other. We work together for 10 hours a day, every day. No one can just flash a badge, especially a badge from another department, which looks nothing like our badge at all. So if somebody flashed a badge and we just let them not only into the crime scene, but just let them run up to a car and a victim, it's absolutely ridiculous. The car is the biggest threat at the scene because the car is the one place there could still be potentially weapons after everybody's patted down. I mean, if somebody is out, just even on a regular traffic stop, if somebody is out of the car, you'd never let that person or their friend just run back into the car. We would never just see somebody with a badge and run into the scene. I mean, if I pulled up on a shooting scene today, I have a badge. I could, if I run up there and just flash a badge and run into the scene, they're not going to let me in. They shouldn't let me in. That's not how things work. So for this guy to tell that story is ridiculous. And another thing is, anytime there's any type of other off-duty police officers involved, whether they're from our department or from another department, that immediately is brought to the supervisor's attention. Now, I'm the supervisor on the scene. I'm a sergeant. I'm the first guy there. I'm in charge of this scene. No one had ever come up to me at any point in that night and said, "Hey, there's an off-duty LAPD guy here, on the scene." It had never been brought up. It was never said to anybody. And I just, either one of the two things happened. I think that this guy was never there at all, which is what I personally think. And if he was there, he certainly never said that he was a police officer. And as far as him flashing a badge and running up and trying to save Tupac, it's just ridiculous.
Another thing that Frank Alexander says in his documentary is that the door of the car was jammed, and the only one who could open it was Suge Knight. Can you dispel this myth too?
Well, the door of the car was jammed a little bit, but Suge Knight never grabbed it because I would not let Suge Knight go back to the car. There's no way in hell that guy was getting back into the car. I mean, he's already out of the car. He's removed himself from it. The car is where the potential weapons are. I'm standing right in front of the door with a gun in my hand and Tupac in the other hand. And the thought that I'd let Suge Knight run back up to the car and pull the door open is ridiculous. It sounds to me like something that's made up from somebody who wasn't at the scene, because it makes sense in that Suge Knight is an extremely large guy, and if the door was stuck, he's probably the most likely guy that could open it. Well, yeah, that makes sense in that aspect, but it doesn't make sense in any other aspect at all.
Well, how long did it take before the ambulance arrived, and what happened in the meantime?
It took about I would say 4 to 5 minutes, which under those circumstances is a long time. So uh, you know the, it's always bad to be the cop who's got an injured person, because you don't really have the medical supplies and so forth that you need, other than just putting pressure on a wound. There's not a lot we can do. But it was a tough 4 to 5 minutes. I did, like I said, have some other bike cops that showed up, and all of us were kind of just trying to keep the situation status quo until we can get these guys patted down. So what we would want to do in that situation in order to gain control is pat these guys down to make sure nobody has weapons. That's first. Another big issue is traffic control, because this is right in the middle of the Las Vegas Strip. It's extremely busy with traffic. There is traffic going both directions, north and south, and from the side streets. And at this point, there's no one to direct traffic. So cars are literally driving around guys that are spread out on the pavement. And, we're trying to maneuver the cars so nobody gets hit. We're trying to control the guys. We're outnumbered. It's a mess. It's a complete mess there for a while until some more cops start getting there. And we can, we eventually got all of those guys to the side of the road. Once we saw that no one else had been shot and everybody was patted down, we could get those guys to the side of the road. And then, becomes the process of start sorting out what happened. Because, of course, at this point, we know absolutely nothing.
And what happened after the ambulance took Tupac away to the hospital? Did you question the guys?
It was kind of they grabbed him, and the first thing they did is intubate him, put a tube down his throat to try to get an airway flowing with him. So when that had come up, did he say anything in the ambulance? Well, he couldn't say anything in the ambulance because he's intubated and he's unconscious. So two of my guys, two of my officers drove in the ambulance with Suge Knight and Tupac. They both went into the same ambulance. And Suge Knight is still being a nut at this point. But he's got the blood coming out of the side of his head. I mean, he clearly needs, at the minimum, to be stitched up. And he's not a cooperative guy, but he went with Tupac in the ambulance. and the ambulance went down to the hospital. So we were left. We tried. Well, we did. We eventually are able to get the crime scene taped off. We put up the tape so that everybody else, in order to keep the general public out of the scene. It really wasn't. There wasn't really a lot of crime scene to process. Basically, the biggest part of the crime scene is the vehicle itself at that point. So we kind of had everything taped off. We're keeping people out of the way because now, spectators are starting to gather and so forth. There were people that took some pictures. Some of those pictures have come up on the internet that I've seen. One thing a lot of people don't understand, especially younger people, is there were no cell phone cameras yet. So, I mean, people try to, especially if you're young and you've lived all your life with cell phone cameras, it's kind of hard to understand that everybody doesn't just happen to have a camera on them like they do now. So there were a couple of pictures that popped up. What, and later on, the news gets there and they take video, and you've probably seen the video of the cars on the scene taped off. But of course, at this point, Tupac has long been taken away, and Suge is gone as well. And we're trying to interview the guys, the rest of the entourage.
Do you think it would have been possible to either stop or chase the white Cadillac that shot Tupac at the intersection?
It couldn't have happened. And I'll tell you one thing, that the whole information with the white Cadillac, that didn't come up until later. Nobody said white Cadillac that night. This turned out, a lot of these guys were re-interviewed in homicide the next day, and Suge Knight was also interviewed the next day. And somewhere in that process, somebody brings up white Cadillac. I never talked to anybody that night, police or part of Tupac's guys, who said white Cadillac. So when you got to remember, when these guys, the officers that hear the shots, they hear the shots ring out. They go to the side basically of the parking garage, which you can see, over the edges of the parking garage, and they see a bunch of vehicles speeding away. I don't even think they ever even saw a white Cadillac. And if they did, the white Cadillac did not take off in direction of the strip. It went the other way. So there was no way for a bicycle to keep up with that white Cadillac. We only kept up with the entourage because they were heading towards the strip. Had they gone the other direction, we'd have never, they would have left us in the dust.
There's also some confusion about the fact that probably they were stopped by other cops on bikes because their radio was too loud before the shooting. Do you know anything about this?
I do. And, I had heard that through the grapevine, but I had never talked to a cop who said, yes, I stopped him. That's changed. I have talked to the guy. I finally found one of the guys who I hadn't talked with him about Tupac in years, years and years. And he brought up that he was the guy, that he had stopped them. That it was two bike cops that had stopped him because of loud music. And that would be typical of what happens on the strip when we stop. I mean, there's a lot of people cruising on the strip, just driving up and down to have fun, see each other, pick up girls, whatever they're doing. But we usually wouldn't write a ticket for something like that. Something like that is usually, hey, turn down the music and see you later. And that's what happened in this case. They stopped those guys, told them to turn down their music. It was a short, uneventful stop, and they were sent on their way. And that was probably, I can't say exactly, maybe an hour or two before the shooting itself.
So that did happen. It's not a rumor. That did happen.
It definitely did happen.
Okay, since you and I have known each other for a while, I already know that you think that the shooter was Orlando Anderson. What makes you so sure that he was the killer?
A couple of things. People don't like to hear, they don't like the story that actually happened because, in fact, it's not a very intriguing story. But what had happened is earlier that evening, Orlando Anderson was in the MGM hotel, as was Tupac and his entourage. There was a Mike Tyson fight that night, and there were a lot of people in town from LA to see that fight, which was typical of a Tyson fight. These guys hated each other so much that somebody told Tupac, hey, Anderson is in the hotel. They went and sought him out, found him in the hotel, and basically beat the hell out of him. And that is on video. You know, it was a pretty good beating, and he's outnumbered. And while he's on the ground, they're stomping on him and stuff. Well, you know, Orlando Anderson had long been known. Everybody knew he was a shooter. He was a bad dude. He was the type of guy, if you were going to beat up that guy, you better be ready to answer for it, because he's going to be coming for you. So what he did is he went and got a gun, and he found those guys later that night, and he shot them. And that is, it's not a very exciting story, but it's reality. You know, that's how things work on the street. So not only do we have the fight beforehand, but then he goes back to LA, Orlando Anderson, and proceeds to brag about the crime to multiple people. So he tells a lot of different people he was the one that shot Tupac. So then years later, his uncle, Keefe D, says in an interview that he was in the white Cadillac and in fact handed Orlando Anderson the gun. So now we've got somebody in the car who also admits that he saw Orlando Anderson do the shooting, and in fact handed in the gun. So one of the things that a lot of people don't know with this is Orlando Anderson the next year was murdered himself in LA. So the question that's always brought up is, why was there no arrest in this? And the answer is simple. The guy that did it is dead. That's why there's no arrest in this.
So that makes a sort of full circle, because he was dead too.
Yeah, I mean, what can you do? I think there's enough people have talked, and you know, if you just look at the overall situation, it all makes sense. And he was bragging about it himself. I think all of those pieces come together, and he is the guy. He's the guy that did it.
Well, Chris, many thanks for your time and for your very precious explanations. I think that you gave a very good picture of what happened on that crazy night that today is kind of involved in mystery and legend, because this case has gotten so much attention in recent years. So many thanks for your time. Many thanks for your explanations. Thanks everybody for watching this, and see you all next time. Bye-bye.
Good seeing you again.